So how exactly did Filipinos go from being ignored and rejected to having a pope who finally felt like family? In 1995, 5 million Filipinos gathered in Luneta for Pope John Paul II. It was the biggest papal crowd in history until 20 years later when Pope Francis visited Manila and broke that record with about 7 million people gathering together. But what made his visit truly historic was not really just the size of the crowd. It was what he did the day before. He flew to Tacloban in the middle of a storm. The Pope stood in the rain amongst the people, soaked and silent, crying with the survivors who had lost everything to one of the deadliest typhoons in world history. For many around the world, he was more than just a pope. And for us Filipinos, he was Lolo Kiko, or literally Grandpa Francis in Tagalog, or in Kapampangan, Apong Kitong, a man who showed up when it mattered the most, a pope who finally felt like family, truly a Santo Papa. But did you know that back in the year 1900, two Filipino priests sailed all the way to Rome to meet with the Pope? Fathers Luciano Araullo and Father Jose Chanco went to the Vatican to present their petition, not asking for any favors, but to plead for recognition, dignity, and equality, only to be ignored, rejected, and quietly sent back home. Mabuhay! Or in Kapampangan, luwid kayo! Welcome to my channel, it's me Kirby Araullo, your friendly Pinoy historian. In today's video, we're exploring how Pope Francis changed what the papacy meant to the Philippines, and why so many Filipinos, millions of Filipinos, regardless of religion, saw him as more than just a pope, but as someone who truly cared. But to truly understand why his impact was so profound, we need to look back not just at his papacy, but at the centuries of power, silence, and struggle that came before it. For centuries, popes made decisions that shaped the history of the Philippines, from the shadows of Rome, far removed from the realities on our shores. That power was not just spiritual, it was political, and it reached deeply into the lives of Filipinos long before any pope set foot on our islands. Some blessed colonizers, while others stayed quiet through times of tyranny. Few truly saw us. Then came Pope Francis, a pontiff who didn't just preach to the poor, he stood with them, who didn't just visit the islands, he wept in our storms, who didn't just speak, he listened. And he broke a long silence, and in doing so, he became something rare in history, a pope who felt present, a Santo Papa who felt like one of us. Unknown to many, popes were directly involved in how colonialism took shape in the Philippines. And I mean, they didn't just bless the system, they actually helped design it. In fact, even before the Spaniards reached the Philippines, Pope Alexander VI had already granted them control through the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494, which split the non-European world between Spain and Portugal. Then in 1579, Pope Gregory XIII didn't just create the Diocese of Manila, he actually gave the Spanish crown full control over the church through the Patronato Real. That meant that Spain and not Rome appointed bishops, funded missions, and controlled church leadership. By doing so, the Pope didn't just bless the Spanish missionaries, he legitimized the entire colonial structure. Spanish friars ran the parishes, while yes, we had Filipino priests. They were ordained but always treated as inferior, as second class. And even the reforms of the Council of Trent, meant to fix church corruption in the 1500s, were barely enforced in the colonies. Power remained in Spanish hands for centuries. Now fast forward to the 1800s. Filipino priests had been demanding reforms for decades, asking to lead parishes, to be promoted, and to be treated as equals, at least within the church. Then in 1872, three Filipino priests, Mariano Gomez, Jose Burgos, and Jacinto Zamora, were falsely accused of inciting a mutiny that they had nothing to do with. But the real crime was simple. They dared to advocate for the rights of the Filipino clergy. Sadly, they were publicly executed without any real evidence and without a fair trial. It was a message to anyone who dared challenge the system. Today we know them as the GOMBURZA. While they were not the first to demand justice, their gruesome death and sacrifice lit a fire that spread beyond the church and eventually helped ignite the Philippine Revolution. Centuries later, a new Pope, Leo XIII, would be given a chance to break the pattern, to break the cycle. So what exactly happens when the faithful go to the Vatican, when two Filipino priests meet with the Pope to ask for equality? By the year 1900, decades after the GOMBURZA and just a few years after the Philippine Revolution, Filipino Catholic priests were still pushing for reforms and equality. Two respected Filipino clergy, Father Salustiano Araullo and Father Jose Chanco, personally traveled to Rome to meet with the Pope and to present a formal petition to Pope Leo XIII on behalf of the Filipino priests. Now officially, they were received in a private audience by Cardinal Rampolla, who was then the Vatican Secretary of State, the second highest man in the Vatican, along with other senior church officials. The Filipino priests were not demanding for a purge. They were simply asking for fairness and equality, to remove the Spanish friars who had long controlled and abused Filipino parishes, to appoint Filipino bishops who actually understood the people they served, and to end the racial hierarchy that had long kept the native clergy in permanent subordination. The petition was respectful, theologically sound, and rooted in loyalty to the faith, a testament to the conviction and the courage of Father Araullo and Father Chanco. But the Vatican gave no official reply. In fact, behind closed doors, Spanish bishops resisted fiercely, while the American colonial officials, who are now in power in the Philippines, strongly urged the Vatican to maintain so-called stability. Father Salustiano Araullo and Father Jose Chanco were quietly sent back home, while their petition disappeared into the Vatican bureaucracy. No answer came, only silence. And that silence spoke volumes. In response to that silence, revolutionary Filipino priests like Gregorio Aglipay, who was a key figure in both the clergy and the independence movement, helped establish the Iglesia Filipina Independiente, or the Philippine Independent Church. But it wasn't a rebellion against faith. It was a movement to reclaim it, led by Filipinos who had been denied a voice for too long. When a pope finally visited the Philippines, finally setting foot on our islands for the very first time in history, something shocking happened before he could even say a word. In 1970, after 4 centuries of Catholic rule, Pope Paul VI became the very first pontiff to set foot on the islands of the Philippines. And his visit was historic, not just for the church, but for a nation on the edge of authoritarian rule. The moment the Pope stepped off his plane in Manila, chaos broke out. A man disguised as a priest lunged at him with a knife, intending to kill him. The attacker, a Bolivian painter, was quickly tackled and subdued, and luckily the Pope survived with a minor chest wound, and the visit went on as planned, as if nothing happened. The Philippines during this time was in turmoil. Protests were exploding. Then President Marcos Sr. was consolidating power. The streets and the fields were burning with unrest. Filipinos had hoped that the Pope might say something, anything, about justice, about inequalities, or the silence of the Church in the face of repression, in the face of tyranny. But instead, Pope Paul VI spoke of peace, unity, and dialogue. His message emphasized harmony over justice. He stayed silent on repression, landlessness, corruption, and the worsening poverty plaguing the country. Filipinos had waited for centuries to be seen by Rome, to be seen by the Pope. In 1970, they were literally seen. But were they truly heard? When Pope John Paul II visited the Philippines not once, but twice, it wasn't just history being made. It was a connection that Filipinos would never forget. In 1981, just after Marcos Sr. lifted martial law, the charismatic and courageous Pope John Paul II, who defied authoritarian rule in Eastern Europe, became the second pope to visit the country. He beatified San Lorenzo Ruiz, the very first Filipino saint, a powerful gesture that honored local faith and sacrifice. But the moment was complicated. Many Filipinos hoped that the Pope might say something about the dictatorship, or the human rights abuses, or the uneasy role the church played under it. He didn't. Instead, his message focused on prayer, reconciliation, and youth. Back in Europe, Pope John Paul II had courageously challenged authoritarian regimes. But in the Philippines, he chose a quieter path. Then in 1995, Pope John Paul II returned to the Philippines for the World Youth Day being hosted in Manila. And it was something else entirely. Over 4 to 5 million people gathered in Luneta, making it the largest people gathering, the largest Catholic Mass in history at the time. The energy was electric. He was greeted like a rock star, but embraced like family. Streets were flooded with people. Churches overflowed. And for many young Filipinos, this was the first time that the Catholic faith felt so alive and exciting. Now, I was only 6 at the time, but I still vividly remember the energy and the songs we had to learn in school to welcome his arrival, like Tell the World of His Love.
Let us tell the world of His love, the greatest love the world has known. Search the world for those who have walked astray and lead them home. Tell the world, tell the world of His love.
I vividly remember how I felt when I first heard him speak in Tagalog. That alone left lasting impact on me and to millions of Filipinos. Indeed, Pope John Paul II inspired millions and brought hope to a new generation around the world. But even with all that love, many things were still left unspoken. Past wounds and present-day controversies, both in the Catholic Church and in the Philippines, were still swept under the rug. Unlike others before him, Pope Francis didn't just visit the Philippines. He arrived with open arms and left with the hearts of millions. In 2015, just over a year after Typhoon Haiyan or Typhoon Yolanda swept through and devastated the Visayas, Pope Francis flew to Tacloban to be with the survivors. The Visayas was still in pain. Thousands had died. Millions were displaced. Many had lost everything. As the Pope stepped onto the rain-soaked tarmac, wearing only a plastic poncho, Pope Francis celebrated Mass in the middle of a storm. He spoke from the heart, and even setting aside his prepared homily, and at one point, he broke down in tears. It was raw, unfiltered, and deeply human. Filipinos saw in him not just a pope, but as someone who listened, someone who was not distant. He was our beloved Lolo Kiko, grandfatherly, warm, and familiar, the kind of leader who embraced everyone, spoke simply, and truly felt like family. The very next day, he returned to Manila, where over 6 to 7 million people gathered in Luneta to see him. To this day, it is the largest papal gathering in history, surpassing even that of Pope John Paul II's historic visit 2 decades earlier. Pope Francis preached compassion, called for mercy, and reminded the world of the strength of Filipino faith. Lolo Kiko stood with the people, and for many, that was more than enough. Around the world, Lolo Kiko was known for his empathy. He proudly stood in solidarity with the survivors of Yolanda, with the people of Palestine, and with those in the Philippines who continue to fight for human rights and dignity. Pope Francis passed away in 2025, just a few days ago, leaving behind a legacy of humility, compassion, and courage. For Filipinos, Lolo Kiko, or Apong Kitong, will always be remembered not just for his words, but for his actions, and how deeply he was present. Long before Pope Francis ever set foot in the Philippines, his predecessors, about 52 popes before him, shaped our people's history, shaped our society, shaped our motherland, with decrees, with decisions, through sermons, and through silence. But Pope Francis did something rare. He showed up, he listened, and he truly stood in solidarity with our people like none ever had. From Pope Alexander VI dividing the world in the 1400s, to Pope Gregory XIII blessing colonialism in the 1500s, to the execution of the GOMBURZA in the 1800s, and to Pope Leo XIII ignoring Filipino priests pleading for dignity and equality in the 1900s, there is no doubt that the papacy shaped Philippine history for centuries. There is no denial that the Pope impacted the lives of Filipinos from afar. Some popes offered comfort, while many others protected power. But Pope Francis, or Lolo Kiko, chose genuine solidarity. He didn't change everything, but he changed enough. He made space for the unheard and the excluded, not just in the Philippines, but around the world. From the poor to the LGBTQ communities, from the immigrants to the indigenous peoples. Regardless of religion, he embraced the people who had long been pushed to the margins of power. He challenged oppressive systems. He broke the silence. He preached love that meant justice, and mercy that demanded action. And for millions of people around the world, long excluded from Rome's inner circle, that truly meant a lot. Filipinos fondly call him Lolo Kiko for a reason. He didn't rule from above. He walked beside us. And now with his passing, the question remains, will the church keep listening? Will the next pope stand where he stood, with the poor, the grieving, the forgotten? Or will they go back to silence? Millions around the world, especially in moments of crisis, turn to faith not just for answers, but for presence, for a comforting embrace. Pope Francis became that presence. He became that welcoming embrace, not because he had all the solutions, but because he showed up in Tacloban, in prisons, in refugee camps, places where the wounded cried for hope. He stood with the people of Gaza, Ukraine, South Sudan, the Philippines, and beyond. He genuinely made people feel seen, heard, and held across borders, beliefs, and identities. He was, in every sense, a universal grandfather, truly a Santo Papa. He was genuinely the people's Pope. Pope Francis reminded us that the church does not belong to the powerful, it truly belongs to the people. He reminded us that no power, no system, no faith matters if it forgets and fails the people it claims to serve. Because in the end, this is not just about the Vatican or the papacy. It's not just about the Catholic Church. It's about compassion that takes action. It's about uplifting the marginalized and empowering the exploited. It's all about liberating the people and building a world rooted in genuine peace, justice, and human dignity. And if you think about it, Pope Francis was just doing what Jesus actually did. Maraming salamat po, Lolo Kiko. Mabuhay po kayo. Dakal pong salamat, Apong Kitong, luwid ko po.